Do you happen to know, there were so many, like you say, there are so many artifacts here from the Lyman Brown. Is that because it was sold out of the family and people just wanted to get rid of it, or do you know why?
I think different people, like Art's mother had the prune brown bathing suit that's on the
Oh,
screen
yeah.
back there.
Oh, yeah.
She had that, and her daughter found it after she was gone and donated it.
Okay.
And I think Maxine also had the quilt that her grandmother had, or great-grandmother had made.
Yes,
So
quilt on the
they-
wall over here.
Different members of the family had them and donated
Yes,
them, and maybe other people in town had things too. I don't know.
Well, I heard too that once it finally was sold, the barn was full of, you know, like these lanterns and the candle molds and, you know, all those things.
Probably.
Yeah.
And they're all labeled, you know, from the
Yeah.
Lyman Brown homestead. And it's just, you know, like half the collection.
And
is from that.
there is still a lot of stuff in the barn
I'll bet.
that hasn't been.
It's still there now?
The interesting thing about the barn, if you go into the barn and you look to you go in through the first section, you look to the right, there's an area on the wall that is a rack. And the rack has the different names of the camps on them and the owners. And there's the Weeks Camp and the Rest Haven Camp. And those racks were designed to hold the oars. And next to the section that held the oars is a little shelf, a little box where the oar locks and the keys were kept. And that was the campers in those days came to the homestead farm to get their ice and their mail and their groceries. I think I can remember my folks back this would be in the very late 30s, stopping there after an 8 or 9 hour trip, several flat tires later, coming up from Massachusetts to go to camp for the weekend. We'd stop there and get a block of ice, and of course the ice was stored right there at the camp. There was an ice storage building there. I mean, I'm sorry, the ice was stored at the farm.
Yeah.
And it would be covered with sawdust. They'd pull it out of the sawdust, and we'd throw it into the bow of the boat and row across to the camp. And there was very little motorboat activity on the camp in those days.
On the lake.
Yeah, on the lake.
Yep.
And it was interesting because neither his mother and the father knew how to swim. And here they are late at night bringing little kids over in a rowboat. And I don't think they even had life jackets
Pitch
back
black.
then.
Pitch black. You couldn't,
So, I mean, it's
you couldn't see a
really,
hand in front of you at night.
really interesting.
Yeah. And
Do we have pictures of inside the barn of those, like we were just talking about? It would be interesting.
the oars, where the
Where
oars
the
were kept.
oars
Do
and
you think
things
they're
like
still
that.
there?
I have some that
Oh,
I
you do?
took recently. Yeah, hi Dick.
It's the woman there is very interested in the history
Yeah.
of the family and.
The inn owner. Because this is the old Orchard Inn now.
Right,
Right.
right.
And a lot of these peoples have their initials and their names carved in the wall inside the barn at Homestead Farm. Now who's the gentleman who used to,
Alan Dodge?
Alan Dodge, who was, I think he owned the farm at one point.
Yeah, he did.
And he used to provide service to the campers, pick up their groceries and the mail and
Okay.
so forth and bring it down to the landing. And then they'd row over and get it. Rowing was the transportation of the day
Yeah.
out there.
Was Lee's Mill still pretty active as a commercial area at that time, or mill area?
It wasn't, and I don't remember a whole lot of activity, but
Yeah.
in the years past, it was, there was no activity on the lake back then except for logging, and that's what they used to do, is bring the logs down to Lee's Mills and dump them in the lake, and then float them down to.
Yeah. Now, somebody was saying, how would the logs make it through that pinch point there, right there at the,
Yeah, I don't know.
with all those rocks?
Well,
You'd think it would just
Yeah, I'm
make a
sure,
huge jam.
I'm sure there were many places where they had to deal with that.
Yeah.
But,
I would say that a lot of the logging that took place back prior even to the Browns being there would have been the fact that they logged the mill that was down at Lee's Mills, which is where the Lee's Pond drops in. There was a mill built there.
Yeah.
The logs were put into, actually originally were put into Lee's Mills, Lee's Pond, during the winter months, and then they were floated down, but they also were brought in to Lee's Mills and brought up through. And it was all milled at that point.
And then the milled lumber was either
It was probably,
taken away by wagons or
well, probably
by
either that
boats?
or by steamer,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, there were quite a few mills there. Bob Lamprey covered some of it in his book. It would have been nice to have known more about it, but
Yeah.
There was a barrel, didn't they make barrel staves down there somewhere on the left-hand side, just before you turn to get out to the lake?
could be.
I think so.
But at the time that you remember going across, it was very quiet, right?
No, the buildings were falling away to rack and ruin in the days that I recall being there.
But the buildings were still there. I mean, some of them.
Some of them.
Yeah.
And there was a huge dock,
Yeah.
a big dock that,
Yeah.
there's a picture on the board of that big dock. It was still there at that point.
And David McKinney owned a building down there. He had a building down there that he used to repair boats, I think, or automobiles or something. He had a repair shop there. And that was one of the last buildings to go out with the hurricane of '38, was it?
Oh.
Must have been.
Yeah.
It was still in the 50s though.
It was
When
still,
I was a kid, one of the buildings was still
Yes.
standing.
was pretty dilapidated.
That was probably
It
David
was in bad,
McKinney's.
bad shape,
Yeah.
Right.
but it was still, and there was
Right.
a semi-dock, because we used to
Yeah.
go down and fish down there.
Right.
And you talk about the barn and the homestead sister, you talk about the old Larson place?
Yeah.
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 Now, was Larson a Brown? Was he?
P.O. married Mildred,
Really.
Millie. And
Mildred
Millie,
Brown.
she was not a Brown. She was
She was a
Will
Carter.
Carter's daughter. Will
Okay.
Carter married
A Brown.
Myra Brown.
Okay.
So she was a stepdaughter to my great aunt, Myra.
Okay.
Are they related to the Browns on Long Island?
No, I don't believe they are.
I think it's a totally different family.
believe
We've
they
never
are.
been able to find a connection.
Millie had a brother,
Harold.
Harold, who wound up out on the West Coast living out there somewhere. Don't know a whole lot about him, but I have some pictures of him and Millie and
Hello.
my aunt.
Some of the history.
Oh, I see.
Come right in.
Yeah.
Hi, come on in.
Now, how were the Carters related to Will Raymond?
Only through marriage.
Because when we bought our property, we
People are
got
talking
to
Family members.
sign off. My dad had to get Mary Carter's signature, I believe.
Who's singing?
I think it was Mary Carter, and she was, somehow it was through Will
Might have been
Raymond.
Myra. Was it Myra?
Maybe it was
Myra.
I'll have to look back.
It would be Myra. That would be my great aunt. Yeah, she was married to Willis Carter.
Okay, well, for somehow, Bill got the land that we had our cottages on.
Oh, really?
And that, and then we had to be signed off in order to,
Oh, that I didn't know.
yeah. So I often wondered, I know Will had a couple wives besides your aunt.
Will had she
No.
was his second wife, Ruby. Was it Ruby? What was her, no, I'm trying to think of what was on that trunk. Osborne. Her last name was Osborne, and she had 2 kids, and she died when the children were very young, and then he married Myra Brown. So,
Well, I knew him in 1935, that area. I've been here a long time, too.
And where is your place?
It's on Wentworth Shore Road, that used to be Shaker Jerry Road, but
Oh, yeah.
somehow the town changed the name. I don't know why.
Is that the road that goes towards, goes down the lake but doesn't continue, that it stops part way? And
It stops, and you
Yeah.
can't go any further.
you have to walk about
You
100 feet.
go, we were where Mr. Wolf was, and then, which the property was right across from Clemens. Yeah. Well back. So it was that whole plot of land. My father had bought quite a bit of property.
Really? I never knew that he owned anything other than the
He owned
property.
it, and he put a road through. When my mom and I came up the first summer, we had no road behind us. And Will put it in with a fellow by the name of Perry Bodge, and I don't know who else.
Lodge, that's an old name.
Yeah.
Really?
Lodge. Lodge.
Really, Bob?
Sure.
Okay.
Reserve the right.
Go back out.
Those buildings, you know, and she wanted to see the schoolhouse.
Any other questions that I can't answer?
It's neat to hear about Will owning that land
Yeah,
over there.
He
yeah.
had a lot. In fact, he sold it to Richardson's. The rest of the property that went from the brook and all of that land beyond there belonged to the Richardsons. They sold it off piece by piece.
Well, there's a Richardson Point, isn't there,
Right.
somewhere?
She's never been in the library, but I guess her nephew was.
Okay.
Very good, thank you, Art.
Well, that's Richardson Show.